stand to be corrected from 2000, since we started the university started a collaboration with the Institute. The collaboration was to bring in special guests so that we would be able to inform students, lecturers, and the general public of the economic benefits of capitalism, entrepreneurship, and liberalism in a free society. The society philosophy, like that of the institution, is undergirded and guided by the Austrian school of thought that embrace logic, deductive reasoning, and views subjective values of real actors as the ultimate cause of economic growth. As Austrian thinkers, the society and the university, like the Institute, emphasizes private property, entrepreneurship, free market, and sound money as the key drivers of economic performance. So again, I want to thank you for joining us on behalf of the university, the Dean of the School of Business and Hospitality Management, Mrs. Romelda Moxie, the Chair of the School of Business, Dr. Davis, and on behalf of the faculty and other members of the university, we want to thank you for coming. This evening, we are pleased to have as a special guest speaker, as a matter of fact, this is the second of a series of presentations that the institution is collaborating with the Economic Society of the Bahamas, Economic Society of the University this academic year. So again, this is the second. And we want to welcome you, and I'm sure that Dr. Ebeling, our special speaker, would engage and enlighten us about the WTO and the global economy. With that said, I would now like to introduce our interim president, Lakeisha Wilson, to introduce our guest speaker for this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Forbes. Good evening again, all. I have the honor of introducing our guest speaker for tonight. He is the BB&T Professor of Ethics and Free Enterprise Leadership at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. He was formerly Professor of Economics at Northwood University, a former president of the Foundation for Economic Education. He was the Ludwig von Mises Professor of Economics at Hillside College, Michigan, and served as President of Academic Affairs for the Future of Freedom Foundation. He is the author of Austrian Economics and Public Policy, Restoring Freedom and Prosperity 2016, Monetary Central Planning, and the State 2015, as well as the author of Political Economy, Public Policy, and Monetary Economics, Ludwig von Mises, and the Austrian Tradition 2010, and Austrian Economics and the Political Economy of Freedom 2003, and the editor of the 3-volume selected writing of Ludwig von Mises, published by Liberty Fund. He is also the co-editor of When We Are Free, Northwood University Press 2014. His last book, published just recently, is for a new liberalism that was published in August 2019. Join me in welcoming Professor Richard Ebeling.
I believe I was here in February of this year. Wasn't I in February of 2019? And this time I'm back again, and it's good to be here at the university. I greatly admire what the institution does, the quality of the students, the leadership of the staff and the faculty, and it's always a great honor for me to be here. Now, as was pointed out, my theme for this evening is the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and the global economy. And I want to put this in sort of a general context first and then deal with a variety of things. The global economy seems to be under an attack from a variety of directions and sources. On one side, there is the reborn democratic socialists and progressives who insist that the international capitalist system exploits workers and minority groups. On the other side, there are nationalists and other nativists who fear not just the loss of jobs, but the cultural character of their societies from foreign investors and the arrival of immigrants looking for new homes. But the fact is that for almost everyone, everywhere, things are getting better all the time due to the greater openness of an entire globe to trade, investment, and indeed a relatively free movement of people. Now, to put this in a context, I would ask you to allow me to bore you for a few minutes with some numbers. Worldwide, over the last 50 years, life expectancy on average has increased from 56 years to 72 years at a time of death. That is for nearly a 30% increase in the time many of us are likely to live on this earth. In 1966, there were 113 infants dying out of every 1,000 new births. Today, that is less than 32 deaths out of every 1,000 new births, for a reduction of 72% in the number of those dying before they've had any chance to live. Global per capita income has increased from a little below $4,000 a year in 1966 to almost $17,500 in inflation-adjusted dollars in 2018. That represents almost a 375% increase in the average income of everyone in the world in only about 50 years. Another way of thinking about this. In 1820, about 200 years ago, the estimated world population was 1 billion. And out of this 1 billion people, economic historians, demographers estimate that approximately at least 90% lived in abject poverty, everywhere on the entire globe. In 2018, just about 200 years later, the world population has increased to over 7.7 billion from that 1 billion. But out of this much larger world population, the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and these other international organizations, the UN, estimate that less than 10% live in poverty. Just in the last 30 years, poverty has dramatically decreased for humanity. The World Bank estimated that in 1990, the number of people living in poverty worldwide was about 1.9 billion. By 2018, that number had decreased to about 650 million. That is, serious material poverty around the world decreased by 66% in less than 3 decades. And it will continue to decline if international trade among nations is matched by relatively free markets and entrepreneurial creativity freed from excessive taxes and government regulation. Another way of thinking about this. The world has increasingly become a smaller place, as measured by the time it takes to get from one place to another. Let me take the broader view of that. When the famous Italian merchant and traveler Marco Polo left Italy with his father and uncle in the year 1271 to journey to faraway China, they reached the capital of the emperor Kublai Khan 4 years later in 1275. Okay, 4 years to go from Italy to China. A trip from New York to Shanghai now takes, nonstop, less than 15 hours. 200 years ago, in 1820, traveling across the Atlantic, say from Great Britain or France to anywhere in North America, took anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, depending upon the currents and the winds, by sailboat. Today, a passenger air flight enables any one of us to travel from, let's say, London to New York in less than 8 hours. Or more closer to home, to go from London to Nassau takes on average nonstop about 8.5 hours, compared to getting across the Atlantic just 200 years ago in 4 to 6 weeks. Another way of thinking about the change. The most important military engagement won by the United States against Great Britain during the War of 1812 was the Battle of New Orleans, fought on January 8th, 1815. That was 2 weeks after the Treaty of Ghent was signed in Holland, ending the war between the United States and Great Britain. It would still be weeks before sailing ships gave the news to anybody in the United States that the two countries had formally been once more at peace when this great military victory under General Andrew Jackson was fought and won. So the most important battle of the war was fought 2 weeks after the war was over, but nobody knew it. And by the way, that is one of the events that then rode General Jackson to the U.S. presidency in the 1830s, right? The famous general who won the big victory. Today, news events of every type, virtually anywhere on the planet, can be almost instantly known and shared with almost anybody, anywhere on the globe, thanks to the modern evolution and revolution in communications, in the forms of satellite and cable television, the internet with live streaming of audio and video, and the global associations that we now have through social media with both friends and strangers. This is a revolutionary change in our conditions. Let me give you one other example to continue boring you with facts. 200 years ago, most of the food that people ate and the clothes that people wore came from crops grown or out of materials worked up in manufacturing that were accessed within, at most, a couple of 300 miles from where the user was living. Today, we draw upon agricultural foodstuffs and manufactured goods, as well as many everyday human services, from people producing and working all around the world. Climate and local growing seasons no longer determine and limit what fruits and vegetables, for example, we're able to place on our dining tables. All 4 seasons and what nature can provide us with from them are available to us and at our disposal 12 months of every year. We have become so used to such things that we have little or no appreciation of how relatively new all of this is in terms of the sweep of overall human history on this planet. In terms of this meaning of the modern world, modern really means only the last 200 or 300 years, out of thousands of years of recorded history. For almost all of our time on this planet as human beings, to paraphrase or the phrase that has become famous, human life was nasty, brutish, and short for almost all of humanity. So what has brought about this change of the last 200 to 300 years? In life expectancy, in convenience, amenities, quality of life, standards of living, the reducing of the size and the conception of the world interacting with each other. What made all this possible, slowly but surely, for more and more of us everywhere, was the emergence of division of labor and the development of first local and then regional and finally now global trade. There's no doubt about it. Let's remember why people trade. Okay? Why do people trade? If we had to rely upon our own mental and physical abilities and any particular talents we had learned and the resources that accidents of geography and the circumstances of where we were born were the ones available to us, then let me suggest that each of us would live primitive and short standards of life. Think of what you know how to do. Think of the abilities, both mental and physical, that you possess. Think of the particular resources around your immediate personal environment. And now imagine you You're like that Robinson Crusoe on an island all by yourself, and this is all that you have to try to survive and improve the quality of your life. Each of us, if we were dependent upon our own abilities in that sense of knowledge, skills, abilities, and resources immediately around ourselves, would live primitive and austere lives that would be extremely short. Life would be based upon disease, injury, lack of a few meals, or being killed by animals or other human beings competing for the scanty material means of staying alive, which is how humans lived for tens of thousands of years on this planet. Trade enables us to obtain peacefully various desired goods and services that we otherwise could not produce and provide for ourselves. It is only our labor and effort through trade that makes our standards of living possible. Now, we still produce everything ourselves, but we do not do it directly anymore. I may have a job. I may perform a service. I may participate in the production of some commodity or good. And that is the means by which I live. But I am no longer producing directly the things that I need. I acquire them indirectly. How so? I ask myself, what is it that I can do? What commodity could I produce? What labor service I could provide? And to provide it to someone who would be interested and willing to trade for something that they have that I don't have. I can't grow my own food, but maybe I'm a shoemaker and can manufacture and sell shoes to someone who has the food that I desire. Let me sort of place this in the context of here in the Bahamas. Someone, say in Sweden or Germany or Canada, would like to vacation where there is warm seas and soft sand in the winter, something that is not naturally available in their own countries. Those living in the Bahamas would like to enjoy a wide variety of manufactured goods, from automobiles to television sets to cell phones to different types and variety of meats and foods for which there is neither the raw materials nor the manufacturing capability here on the islands themselves. But both of these two groups, the desiring vacationer in Sweden or Canada and the Bahamian who is interested in acquiring things that cannot be produced on the island, each assist the other in getting what they want. Any potential winter vacationer in Sweden, Germany, or Canada can specialize and apply their knowledge, skills, and abilities to producing and selling some good or service that they find willing buyers to purchase from them in some other place in the world. And then with the financial wherewithal they have earned by satisfying someone's demands for the things that they personally can produce, they now have the money means to reserve a hotel, buy an airline ticket, and travel in a matter of hours from their home countries to enjoy a vacation here among you. In turn, by specializing in hotel, restaurant, and water sporting activities, Bahamians are able to earn the financial means that comes from serving the vacation desires of those Swedes, Germans, and Canadians to purchase the manufactured goods that could never be produced in the Bahamas, or if attempted, only at a cost far, far more exorbitant than anything that could be purchased by other suppliers of those goods in other parts of the world. Indeed, the production possibilities of the entire globe are at the disposal of all of you here in the Bahamas. In exchange for what? Vacationing and other services that Bahamians can supply to everyone else around the world. Now, while doing a bit of background research in preparation for my talk, I discovered that according to the World Bank, about 85% of the Bahamas' exports to the rest of the world is in the form of either banking and financial services or tourism. Okay? That's what you supply to the world. some banking and financial, mediation and services, and tourism. If not for the network of global banking, and if not for a world wealthy enough and accessible enough through relatively inexpensive vacationer air travel, the current standards of living, no matter how humble or high, enjoyed by the people of the Bahamas today, would be otherwise impossible. Without the global economy, the people of the Bahamas would no doubt be significantly fewer in number, and the living standards would be noticeably a fraction of the things you take for granted today right here. Because of the degree of global prosperity that the Bahamas is able to participate in, all of you here at the University of the Bahamas have the family standards of living that enable you to spend years without having to work either full-time or part-time to acquire the education that will make you marketable and more valuable to potential employees either here or in other parts of the world. The Bahamian economy and society are wealthy enough for you personally not to have to fully produce all that you consume during your years of acquiring an education. That would be impossible if not for the global division of labor and the rising standards and qualities of living that all of us increasingly enjoy due to the buying and selling in the international marketplace. We don't think about this on an everyday basis. You just take everything that's around you in life, including your own actions and interactions and buying and selling, for granted. But if we just step back and we sort of bracket it and look at it from the wider perspective, we are all the beneficiaries of global trade. We are all the beneficiaries of international division of labor. We are all the gainers from those who could produce things, provide things that are beyond our reach for one reason or another, and which we would have to do without if not this network of supply chains of international trade that now bind us together and make us, in fact, one human community. Now, this now gets us to the World Trade Organization and its relationship to the global economy. The WTO, the World Trade Organization, is actually the outgrowth of a post-World War II arrangement called the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, G-A-T-T, that was created by a network of governments in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War. Its task was to serve as an association for lowering of trade barriers among the nations of the world. It was then reorganized as the WTO in 1995 with its headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. If you visit the WTO's website, it makes clear that it is not an organization dedicated to or proselytizing for free trade. It reflects and serves the shared goals and purposes of its member governments. Many of those governments having differing views on the nature and the desirability of varying degrees of freedom of trade versus protectionism of various sorts. But it is nonetheless the case that over the last 70 years, since the founding of GATT in 1948, that it has in general worked for and moved the world economy in the direction of greater freedom of trade, and most certainly compared to the hyper-trade protectionism and barriers that enveloped most of the world back in the 1930s before World War II. Now, on average, as a result of these trade agreements and rounds of trade negotiation that first GATT and now the WTO has fostered and cultivated and organized, even with Donald Trump's huffing and puffing and threatening to bring down the world trading arrangements, particularly in his dealings with China, the fact is that today, in general, tariff barriers, that is taxes on imports, are relatively low. And in most instances, looking at the average over any particular country's tariff schedule of taxes on imports, are in the single digits. For example, in India, there is an average weighted tariff on the importation of foreign goods of only around 6.3%. While China has a weighted tariff average on imported goods of only 3.5%. The United States, even with Trump's executive orders on threatened tariff increases, the average tariff rate on imported manufactured goods is only about 2%. Now that raises an interesting question. What country has the highest average weighted import tax on foreign goods? According to the WTO, it is the Bahamas, with an 18% tariff rate on average on imported commodities. On agricultural imports, the average is about 17%. And on some foreign manufactured goods, that goes as high as 35%. It needs to be remembered that most of the import tax on foreign goods is not paid by the foreign producer. It is ultimately paid by the consumers in the country purchasing and using those foreign manufactured goods and commodities. The import tax is merely, from the seller's point of view, another cost of doing business which he more or less passes on to the extent that he can to the ultimate consumer buyer. Suppose that some product is being imported into the Bahamas from the United States. Now what has gone into its manufacture? And it's getting it to you at the retail store where you purchase it here, let's say in Nassau. There have been the basic costs of production, the labor, the resources, the use of capital equipment in manufacturing the finished and saleable good by a producer in the United States. Then there are the transportation costs of shipping that good by air or land or sea here to the Bahamas. At point of entry, the Bahamian wholesaler must pay the import duty before he can move this American-made good off the shipping dock or the airport tarmac. From the wholesaler's point of view, the price that he must charge the retail seller in the Bahamas includes manufacturing charges from the U.S. producers, the transportation expenses to bring the good to the islands, and the tax that the Bahamian government has levied from him before he can bring it into the country. Thus, the price that the wholesaler must charge to the retailer, who in turn then offers it to you, includes the import tax along with the other expenses of bringing that good to your market. And also this must be reflected in the price that the retailer then offers. Thus, you, the Bahamian consumer, pays a price for the American-made good that incorporates the import tax cost of doing business as well as the other expenses of the supply chain from producer to the store. This import duty, therefore, tends to raise the price that the Bahamian consumer must pay for it and reduces the amount that he may be willing or financially able to buy of it due to its higher price. So using the WTOF data, let's suppose that you were to purchase a basket of imported agricultural goods that cannot be grown in the Bahamas. And let us suppose that average 17% tax on those agricultural foodstuffs are applying. So without the tariff, let's suppose you bought this basket and it would cost $100. Now, due to the import duties, when you as the consumer actually buy that basket of imported agricultural goods, farm products, it's going to cost you $117. On the other hand, let's suppose that there is some non-agricultural manufactured good that otherwise would cost $1,000 if there was no import duty. But with that import duty of, let's say, the highest of 35%, that means that rather than paying $1,000 for that manufactured good, you'll have to pay $1,350. The Bahamian income earner and consumer is poorer by those amounts. By which I mean that without the tariffs, a Bahamian consumer might have purchased that basket of food items and the manufactured goods for $1,000 and $100, a total of $1,100. But with the tariffs in place, the total cost of buying these things would now come to a total of $1,467. That is $376 more than would otherwise be the case, and is $367 less in your pockets. Less in your pockets to spend on other things that otherwise you would have been able to afford to buy. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, maybe a mom or a dad would have bought a couple of extra pairs of shoes for the kids. Or one of the parents would have had the money to buy for themselves or the other a new set of clothes. Or maybe just the ability to put some extra money aside in a savings account for later family needs, such as and including helping cover the expenses of their kid when they're older going to college. Now, a not unreasonable reply might be that yes, the import tax may be a form of tax on the Bahamian population. But the tax revenue goes into the coffers of the Bahamian government to do things that are collectively needed or desirable for the people of the Bahamas. Now, it would be inappropriate for me, as a foreign guest, to delve too deeply into the internal political affairs of your country. But allow me to ask the following questions. Do you think that these tariff and other tax dollars collected by your government are always wisely and efficiently and effectively spent by those in political authority determining how they shall be used? Now, I know it may seem shocking to even suggest the following, but in some places around the world, those in political power use the taxes they collect from the citizenry, including import duties, to line their own pockets, or to benefit special interest groups and other well-connected cronies close to the halls of political decision-making. I know that seems shocking, but it's been known to happen in other places in the world. I know not here in the Bahamas. I'm just a visitor. I'm not implying anything. Now, I know this is going to seem strange, but that type of political behavior sometimes goes under the name of corruption. Go figure. And again, far be it from me to suggest that any of those things, inefficiencies, wastefulness, benefiting special interest groups, supporting crony friends with government contracts for which the tax dollars are used as payment, I would not presume any of that here in the Bahamas. Your country, I'm sure, is the epitome of sound, honest, efficient government. And I will assure you, if I was in the United States, I would be as sarcastic about my own government. I assure you. Now, there's also another question when one thinks about these tax matters, because often it will be said, and quite reasonably and honestly, but don't we need these kind of taxes in a country like the Bahamas with limited domestic production, precisely because so much has to be imported of everyday items? Must we not tax the imports, otherwise the government wouldn't have revenues? Well, I would just say as an element of this, there's also the question of whether some of the things that the government does might not be better supplied by the private sector, so that reducing or eliminating some of the services and activities currently performed by the government might be privatized in its place, with the result that taxes currently collected to undertake these services could be reduced. Plus, the private suppliers of such goods and services now, instead of the government providing them, would have the usual competitive incentives to produce and make them offered in the market at lower expenses with improved quality over time. We take it for granted that we expect improved qualities at lower prices of television sets, of cell phones, of other modern electronic devices. And this is made possible because when people see that there's a way to make a dollar by making a better product and a less expensive product, and to do it superior to their rival who's trying to get the same consumer business, and therefore they're vying with each other for your patronage, then all of us gain in the long run, because their only avenue of earning that living is to make things better and cheaper for us. And maybe we should think about everything that the government does really needs to be done by the government, and that would save us not only the tax dollars that's collected for the government to do them, but would result in less taxes, including import duties in a country like this, and therefore more money in our own pocket, with the benefit of more variety and better and less expensive goods over time. Nor should it be forgotten that when decision-making is removed from the government hands and shifted into the marketplace, each of us has transferred to ourselves the ability to decide how much and of what type of such services we consider worth buying and investing in, rather than relying upon those in political authority to make these decisions for us, both when we have voted for those people and when we have not, right? Because your candidate either wins or your candidate loses. Either way, you're stuck with what the political decision makers who won decide they're going to give to the society at tax expense to all of us. This includes widening the scope of your personal choices and decisions concerning the purchase and sale of your own goods and labor services, both in the domestic market and in the international arena of trade and exchange. It enables each of us as producers and consumers to better fit and find our personal niches in that social system of division of labor, to more greatly improve our own and our families' well-being and standards of living, as well as the others of society, and eventually everyone in the world, by that mutual and interdependent servicing of our neighbors next door and on other continents halfway around the globe, which is the essence of trade, production, and exchange. And as a result, humanity is improved, which is how we've gotten here over the last 200 years, as the facts and figures I mentioned at the beginning, I think, highly suggested. In spite of all the fears and criticisms of the global marketplace, the socialist criticisms about, worker exploitation, insensitivity, minorities, what exploitation? To be honest, in my view, as long as the government doesn't heavy-handedly get involved in anything to give favors to some and to harm on the basis of those political favors others in the society, all trade is ultimately beneficial to all the participants. I work at a university, like some sitting here in the audience, and I'm paid a salary. Why? Because the institution of higher learning that employs me believes that my services are worth it. Now, did I higgle and haggle over about a salary? Yes. I would like, my wife wishes that my college would be willing to pay me $1 million a year. Now, I go figure, for some reason they don't think I'm worth it. That's beyond me. But we reach mutually agreed upon terms in matters of employment, in matters of borrowing and lending, in matters of the buying and selling of goods and services. And basically, as long as trade is free, as long as trade is competitive, that is, other consumers can compete against each other for the goods they want to buy, and suppliers must and do compete against each other to attract you to their business, then there is no exploitation or abuse of members of the society. I'll mention one other thing, and that is, if that's often the arguments by those on what we define as, quote, the left, well, what about these nationalists and nativists? Oh, our culture is going to be undermined. We are a global culture now. There is traditional Bahamian food and cuisine, I understand. But look around your own islands. Do you mind having Italian restaurants with Italian food, Greek food, right? French food, Chinese restaurants, Japanese restaurants? Do you mind? Are you not enriched with the variety and the qualities available to you? I can assure you, in the United States, in many particularly larger metropolitan areas like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and other places, Miami, there is a huge number of restaurants offering Caribbean cuisine. And do you know what? They have no threat of going out of business. Because everybody views this as an improvement of the varieties and qualities of the things that are there at their disposal. We're in an international, I'm sitting in my hotel room last night, and I had trouble falling asleep. So I'm on my iPad here, made in China but sold by an American company, and a bunch of you have them as well. That's the internationalization of everything. And I'm going to the streaming services, so I go to Acorn. It's basically British films, and I'm watching a British-made show through a subscription that I pay in the United States here in a hotel in Nassau. And I'm sure you watch a bunch of these shows as well. Now, I don't feel, Americans have their own culture. It seems strange, but Americans, it's not like, you're French culture, but as weird as we Americans seem, we have our own culture too. But you know what? I rarely find in an everyday basis that Americans feel threatened by the latest Japanese restaurant that's opened business in their town. Or if in a larger city, a new one has opened a Caribbean cuisine restaurant. No. They make a living because that's not one of the additional choices to enrich everyone. Music. Cultures, societies, people in a more isolated global environment each develop their own music, their own sense of the forms of writing and expressing music. But today we're in a world, should I presume that people in the Caribbean or this part of the Atlantic, feel threatened because they listen to British or American rock music? I assume not. My wife grew up in the Soviet Union. She's Russian. They had to listen to music, clandestinely because it was against the law, bourgeois Western music. Guess who she loved? Bonnie M. Caribbean music. She when she got here to the United States, she said, I want to get a Bonnie M CD. That's the first thing she wanted to do. That just shows her generation. But you know what I'm saying here, right? Okay? You understand what I'm saying? We shouldn't feel threatened by any of this. And I'm going to, on the last point, I'm going to say probably the touchiest and most difficult issue. We shouldn't worry very much about people from other places coming to join us in a society. America is a big country with 30 million or 350 million people. And a lot of Americans go, oh, the immigrants are arriving. Oh, they're going to take over the country. Yeah, I'm in a country that the entire country is the history of immigrants. Now, tragically, a few Americans had their ancestors come to the United States non-voluntarily, if you get my drift here. But the fact is, most Americans come from ancestors who did come voluntarily from many cultures, many societies, many languages, many different religions. And after this going on for over 200 years, there's just this hodgepodge melting pot of American culture, and has made, in my humble opinion, my country's culture and attitudes and life experiences richer and better, rather than being homogenized within one set. It's sort of like when they say, you really shouldn't intermarry too much within your own group, the gene pool. Well, that's the culture pool of the world. The culture pool of the world. We are one humanity today. And it's made possible by global trade, global exchange, global interactions, the sharing of goods, the sharing of services, the sharing of music, the sharing of literature, the sharing of movies, the sharing of everything. And in that way, we all become better and stronger. And that is the future that all of us should want and can have, as long as we cherish and remain true to a spirit of freedom that allows it to happen, both at home and our relations with everyone else abroad. Thank you very much. Okay, I think we have a little time for questions, comments, reflections on the meaning of life. There is a meaning to life? No? Okay, well. Let me see first let me see if a student has a question.
A statistic about Bahamas being the...
I'm just going by the WTO
It really
figures.
surprises me because, as you know, I live between two giant protectionist countries, Brazil and Argentina, that are very, very close. But still, Bahamas has the highest one.
You can get online the 2019 report on international trade, imports, restrictions, and barriers. And I'm just going by what they have in their listing of in general and then separate nations.
Follow up.
Sure.
What kind of tax, if there's going to be some state government activity, do you suggest for the Bahamas?
The Bahamas. Well, you know, the thing is that I would see. Okay. I would suggest a relatively low sales tax. There's several reasons I would say that. I know that you have a VAT here. I'm not a big fan of the VAT. The reason is it hides from you, the consumer taxpayer and citizen, what actually the government is costing you in tax revenue. You know, because at each stage of the production supply chain, the tax is imposed as an unfinished good is passed on to the next manufacturer, who, on like the conveyor belt of production, is doing the next step of it before it finally reaches you, the consumer, right? And then you just pay the price. So how much of that price is represented by the tax? You don't even think about it. It's not hitting you in the face. Now, in the United States, I live in the Charleston, South Carolina area. And Charleston County has a sales tax, right, a consumer goods sales tax of about 9.5%. Well, you know, I go in to buy something for $100, and then and she rings up $100, but then she says, I owe $109.50. Because immediately hits me in the face, you know, it's that much more expensive because of the government. And I think that gives a greater transparency, in my opinion, to what government is costing. It also means that rather than all of the tax accountants having to be present all the way through every stage of the production process, if it's a relatively low sales tax at end of product, that is where you buy it as the consumer, you don't need all these tax accountants. You don't need all these tax records. You don't have to have the taxing authorities prying into everybody's business and affairs and to see, didn't they keep a correct record? Are they cheating over here? You know, is someone earning $1 that partly was supposed to go to us, the government? No. Now, it's a nuisance in terms of tax records for the retailer, but at least that's a much smaller segment of the entire population than the taxing authority imposes itself on now. So given that you're not going to have a perfect world, that at least minimizes a lot of the damage, in my humble opinion. Now, what prevents a sales tax from being exorbitant, like 30% or something? Well, that's your responsibility as the taxpayer voter in reining in what government does, how it does it, and therefore what it's going to cost you out of your pockets that you've earned in your private sector jobs. So the only way to control how much the government tax, given the tax method chosen, is for the taxpayer citizen to think twice before they want government to do too many things for which money is going to have to be raised. Yes?
You are absolutely 1,000% correct. You know, about a year ago, there was a big move afoot to for us to become involved in the WTO. And what happened was it got overrun by people who were scaremongers. They told people we'd be overrun by foreigners and Walmart would come in here and take over everything. It was absolute nonsense. But the government backed off because politically it became a hot potato. But you're 100% right, because right now the government takes in about $650 million from import duties, $150 from excise taxes, $600 to $1 billion from BAT. But if we eliminated all of that and just had a 15% sales tax, government would take in as much money as they're currently taking in, but the cost of living would come down tremendously, and we would be more competitive on the global scene because things would be cheaper. Tourism products would be cheaper, financial services would be cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. So you're 1,000% right.
Yeah, the fact is that, you know, the United States, you know, Donald Trump can play around with the under the U.S. Constitution, all taxing decisions are supposed to be made in Congress. Taxing bills are supposed to, you know, we have two houses. Taxing bills are supposed to start in the House of Representatives, then passed on to the Senate, the upper house. Then they have their own version. The two houses compromise, produce the same bill, then vote on it, and it goes to the president, okay, for his signature. But right now, under the existing precedents, the President of the United States, regardless of who he is, it could have been Barack Obama, it could be Donald Trump, has these executive authorities under national security threats to basically on his own, as if he was a king, to just change the import duty schedules. Now, in the United States, this is a serious business because we get about 20% of our imports from China. But overall, we have an economy large enough that most Americans will just adapt and adjust to Trump's, you know, import duty craziness. But you're a country, obviously in size, economically, and population, a lot smaller than the United States. You are too dependent on your participation in the global economy as sources of income that enables you to buy from others, as I was explaining, all the other things that you cannot produce here or could not in any way produce them as inexpensively as in other places in the world, to allow, you know, these tax schedules to radically and negatively affect your standards of living and the ability to improve them over time. You have to practice, in general, a regime of low tax free trade. That is the source of you having a standard of living that would otherwise be impossible for you to have. Yes?
Sort of following up from the one of the gentleman's statements about fear. In many textbooks and from many professors, you'll hear the word neoliberalism, and soon follows World Trade Organization, World Bank, IMF. And I'm wondering, in context of something you said in your lecture about when people trade, all those involved benefit. Yes. I just recently read in a textbook that I use here that that entering into the World Trade Organizations will produce winners and losers. And I'm wondering how you might respond to that.
It all depends upon what you mean by winners and losers and the time frame. Let us suppose that people back 200 years ago had said the way we do things is the perfect and absolutely desirable way of doing things, and there's going to be no more change. How would we get around today? In horses and wagons. How would we cross oceans? In sailboats. What would be the variety and types of goods that we could consume? Well, it would be whatever the technologies practiced and utilized in 1820 were. We'd be frozen. Now, every innovation, domestic or through international trade, brings about transformations on what is done, how it's done, where it's done, and by whom. You know, there's a famous 20th century economist named Joseph Schumpeter, and in a famous book of his called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, which was published in 1942 during the Second World War, he coined this phrase of creative destruction. The competitive market, the competitive enterprise society is one of creative destruction. What do you mean by that? Well, it's always churning innovations, improvements. You set loose the profit motive to get people to get their creative juices going. How can I make a different product? How can I make a better product? What about a new technology? What about a different way of running a business? Okay, that's creative. But in the process of introducing the creative, it destroys the existing ways of doing things. Let me give one example of this. If we could go back to a time machine to about 1900, a little over 100 years ago, and if you looked at the census figures of the US government in terms of occupations, you would find that approximately 50% of the US labor force, 45%, still was directly or indirectly involved in agriculture and farming. It's a huge percentage of the population, 45 to 50% directly or indirectly involved in farming and farm production. Fast forward to today. The percentage of the working population in the US involved in farming, directly or indirectly, 3%. In just over a century. That's because of technological innovation. Labor-saving machines, greater productivity with crops. Now, what happened to those jobs? They disappeared. Now, in some cases, an actual person had to choose to either leave the farm or, to be honest, he was let go by his boss. Oh, I'm investing in this farming machine. Goodbye. And he had to maybe go to the city and find a different job. Or more often, as the changes were occurring, instead of that person's son going into farming, it's sort of like a replacement as he retired, the son went into manufacturing, or the service sector, or the educational sector, or some other thing. The hands were freed from farming to do all these other things that now we take for granted, that when the hands were tied up in agriculture, they weren't free to do for all of us. There is short-run change. But all of us, at the end of the day, benefit. We are the beneficiaries of the earlier generations who adapted to new change. Technological, institutional, the buying and selling desires and habits of people. We're all the beneficiaries of the early generations who bit the bullet and adapted to new changes in the society that cumulatively have given us the standards of living. It is absolutely true. If a country either introduces itself to or increases its presence in the international division of labor, whereas before it was, quote, protecting its domestic industries behind tariffs and other import restrictions. Once those go down, the domestic producers now find themselves having to face foreign competitors who may make a better product, who may be able to market and sell it at a lower price, even with the transportation costs of bringing it to that country. And the domestic producers, and some of those employed by them, will have to adapt and change. But the jobs will be there. The profit opportunities will be there. Why? Because you can't buy those imports unless you devise a way to be a producer at home to be able to export to pay for them. As I explained, all of the manufactured and industrial and agricultural goods that you consume, that you don't make here, is paid for by you. Through what? By the providing of those financial and tourist services that generate the income that enables you to buy what everyone else in the world is supplying. You may have to adapt and change. But all of us will be better off, and certainly when we think to our next generation, we'll be better off by us responding to what the market is telling us. That's profitable, this is less profitable. This skill of mine is still in demand. The market is saying I have to retool myself. Otherwise, we are frozen in the past, and we condemn future generations to a lower standard of living than we have benefited from, to the extent that the generations before us were willing to change.
Please, ask your question, sir. Yeah.
Yeah, next question.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes?
Yeah.
Seems to me we have to think more about tourism as an export product. Because what is tourism? What are we exporting? We're exporting for every foreign dollar that comes in. We're exporting environment. What are we exporting? We're exporting environment. Now, part of our environment is man-made, God-made. It's our climate, our sunshine, our beaches.
Right.
but part of it also is man-made. It's created by our hotels, our restaurants, our shops, and therefore it's extremely important that we recognize that this is an export product and we can improve it.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important that over the next year or two, whole downtown Nassau is improved, because that will be, in effect, an export product.
Correct. Right, and you know, the thing is, a society can be wealthy without being rich in resources. You know, right now, Hong Kong, if you're following the news, is in the news because of all these demonstrations by the citizens. But Hong Kong is a very prosperous little place of the world. It really is, as it said, it's really just a rock off the coast of China. It has very few natural resources. It doesn't even have a lot of enough, non-salted water for drinking. It has become this major producing and trading center because they have devised a way to use their talents to be able to acquire the capital to develop certain local manufacturing, to act as a port of entry to other places now because of China being more open than it was under Chairman Mao, obviously. So you can be wealthy without wide resources, raw materials, or even a large capital base. You know, there are niches in the division of labor. I can't grow my own food. I can't make my own clothes. I can't manufacture my own car. In other words, I'm an incompetent nincompoop. And if you don't think so, ask my wife. She tells me that every day. But I have a little niche, and that's my ability that somebody values to write and teach and lecture about economics. And that's my way to earn a living. Given the geography of the world, what is the comparative advantage of the Bahamas? To a great extent, though, not only tourism, the natural things that has been given to these islands by the geology of the development of the planet, and then what has been added to it, exactly as the gentleman was saying. What has been added to the natural amenities that make this attractive for tourism? The hotels, the restaurants, the facilities, the entertainments, which can be enhanced, and the people, right? Why do people come and then come back to the Bahamas for a holiday? Because they like you. They find it nice to visit you. By the way, that's supposed to make you feel warm and cuddly. Oh, people like me around the world. Okay, that's supposed to make you feel warm and cuddly.
It's true.
But it's true, okay? So take advantage of that. Now, things change over time. And if the changing currents and forms of the International Division of Labor, it was found by people innovatively thinking about it to find new and other niches to add to the existing ones as sources of income and revenue.
About people who've actually lost their jobs because of globalization. And
Yes.
that's the problem that Trump has in the United States right now. People lost their jobs, and you can't just retool them, retrain them overnight. With a different type of economy. When you made the point about agriculture being
Right.
50% of the US,
Right.
okay, and now it's only 3%.
Yes.
But that took place over quite a time frame.
Couple of 3 decades.
That's right. So people have time to adjust.
Yes.
What's happening now, the new knowledge-based economy, is things are moving so rapidly, robotics, genomics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Change
People
has
don't have
accelerated.
that time to adjust. And the adjustment that needs to take place requires that the whole educational system change, because you've got to cater towards the STEM subjects. And if you don't cater towards those, you're done.
Right, and precisely because change is happening more rapidly than it has in the past, you need to domestically have an open, competitive, and innovative economy to help people to adjust that. I mean, what's the alternative? To save jobs, to create jobs. Now, I alluded to the fact that many other places, of course not the Bahamas, have political corruption, cronyism, special favoritism. I mean, that's the nature of politics. So to the extent that you want to say, I want government to slow down my country's participation in the world economy and protect me, you open the door to favoritism, corruption, cronyism, all of these things where the politicians then have to make the decisions and end up making the decisions about what's best for your life. Now, who knows what's best for you? Now, you're a bunch of you are young people in college. Now, be honest. As you've grown up, has it not sometimes irritated you when your mom and dad told you what to do? Now, they're the closest people to you who, A, really care about you. Well, I assume your parents care for you, but yeah, care about you, and know a lot about you. And you still think, what the hell are they telling me how to run my life, right? You get irritated with it. What the hell does a politician sit in an office down the road here whose own purposes and motives have nothing to do with you know about what's right for you? Does he really have your interests at stake? Does he care about you as an individual? Your parents, however wrong-headed you sometimes may think their attitudes and policies towards you might be, they really care about you. What the hell does the prime minister or a cabinet member or a member of the parliament really care for you? They have their own motives, incentives, and goals and purposes. And that often has little to do with what's right or of value to you as an individual. So who should do the planning for you? You or others? That's basically the bottom line. And that includes an adaptation to change. Yes, change is difficult. Look, if tomorrow it was found possible to use artificial intelligence machines to teach economics classes, and my college said goodbye to me, you know, I'm a little older than you. Yeah, I would find it hard to figure out what the hell am I doing now? And my wife would be asking me a lot, what the hell are you going to do now? But you just adapt to this. You find ways to do it. Do you have to take adjustments in how you live, what you earn? But that's life. Sometimes a little better, sometimes in the short run less attractive, but that's life. Otherwise, we freeze the society and limit and retard progress and improvement and hand the decision-making over to those in political power who, I reiterate again, have no immediate interest in what's important to you, the way you or even your parents have. Okay.
Got time for one more?
Okay, one more?
One more?
Okay.
Okay, good night. The gentleman in front kind of alluded to my question because
Right.
you stated that globalization will be beneficial, I guess, in the long run. You were hinting at for everybody.
Right.
And I wanted to say that I actually agreed with the vote in the beginning not to allow us to partner with the World Trade Organization because I actually had a fear for local vendors or whatever the case may be, because when these big time factories are actually allowed in the Bahamas and they put them out of business and you say, I guess we have to adjust. You keep on saying that we have to adjust, we have to adjust, we have to sacrifice. In which ways, do you have any suggestions in which we can do it? We can't do it because you keep on saying that we have to, but not really saying how to.
Okay, for me to give an answer to that question in particular cases would presume that I know better the circumstances of the people affected than the people themselves. Yeah, we're meeting for the first time, okay? I see you as a person who is a human being, a woman, a student, and a citizen of the Bahamas. Other than that, I know nothing about you. Now, let us suppose that I said, well, you know, things have changed, and now I start deciding what is the right, best way for you to adapt and adjust to the change. I don't have that knowledge. You know, it's not giving an answer. It's saying that the answer resides with each individual. I know my circumstances a lot better than you know my circumstances. You know your circumstances a lot better than everyone else in this room. Now, you can ask for advice. You could ask for worldly wisdom of those who have lived longer and experienced more. But at the end of the day, each of us knows better our own circumstances for two reasons. We've been living our own lives, and we have more of an incentive to try to figure out how to do the adjustment right, because if we do, we succeed. If we don't, the failure falls upon ourselves. We have the strongest interest to try to get it right. The guy in Parliament does not. He gets his salary whether his decision makes your life worse or not. Okay? He gets reelected by promising other things to other people. Okay? And he can all do that arrogantly saying, I serve for the people and I'm only doing it all good for them. It's all empty rhetoric. Okay? He's in it for himself and he knows little about you. So who knows the most how to adjust? The people who are experiencing it. You know, if I did lose my job teaching, I wouldn't be happy about that. And I would have to make adjustments. And initially, financially down as opposed to up, I'm sure. But what do I find is the right niche? The next best alternative, both immediately and then trying to figure out, well, how can I get out of that to at least try to move back better to where I was before or more? I do. No, I can't. No one has that answer except, let me give you one more example. I was traveling in the former Soviet Union in the last years of its existence, doing consulting work on market reform and privatization. And I would talk to some Soviet economists, and I would explain that, you know, what they needed to do was to get rid of government-owned industry, move towards a market, and allow the profit motive and free enterprise to move the Russian economy forward. And they would say to me something like the following: yes, I understand, but what industries are going to fail and what should they do instead? But that was the problem with central planning. The government didn't have the knowledge to get it right. But these people had it in their mindset, well, I want to know what to do, and you have to tell me. They were waiting for a central planner. There is no central planner. Each of us have to be planners for ourselves. Now that's tough, and that puts responsibility of decisions and outcomes on ourselves. It's called freedom, rather than having someone else manage and control your life. Because at the end of the day, like I said, you have the strongest interest to get it right rather than wrong. And secondly, you know your circumstances better than any of the others. So in a world that's going to change whether you like it or not, but if you adapt and are open to that adaptation, you're likely to be gaining improvements as time goes on along with everyone else. You don't want the government to have that power of decision-making in their hands instead of yours. I don't know what else to say, and I apologize if that's not what you wanted to hear, but that's the way I see it. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Thank you very much.
So
The
that's the final
criticism for WTO
Yes?
is that it's anti-competition and it's imposing regulation on the Bahamas if we join WTO. That is the big problem with WTO here.
As I said in my explanation, the WTO is not, and it does not say on its website that it is an organization devoted to free trade. It is an organization reflecting the interests and the policy goals of its member governments. And often that involves regulations rather than freedom. Now, the difficulty is that if a country, particularly a small country, does not join the WTO, it then has to deal with all the other nations of the world in unattractive ways. And other countries are going to treat you even more unattractively because you refuse to be a team player. That's why the European Union is giving the Brits such a hard time about leaving. It isn't so much how they can deal with each other. The point is that they can have the same positive elements of an integrated market, but without Brussels telling Britain what to do. But Brussels is afraid, that's the EU headquarters, Brussels is afraid that if Britain leaves and can do so on terms that leave trade and capital flows pretty much the way it was while they were in, then other countries want to leave. And then another country, and another country, and suddenly their system has collapsed. So you have to be tough on this guy so no others try. It's sort of like the racketeer who threatens someone and beats him up to keep everybody else in line. And that's what the EU is trying to do with the Brits. Now the problem is any country that doesn't want to play ball by not being in the WTO or other international organizations, it's the same motive. And that's the rock and the hard place that a small country finds itself in. Yes?
Given that the Bahamas is an exporter of services more than goods,
Yes.
it just need to dismantle their tariffs.
Yes.
Not under WTO, just dismantle your tariffs and sell your services.
Yes. A country can follow a policy of unilateral free trade. Now, you used to be part of the British Empire. It was really big in your history books one time. Anyway, so now how did Great Britain establish freedom of trade? It happened in the 1840s. Now, there were big debates, government protection, particularly of agriculture in Britain, free trade, letting free trade in goods, particularly food, too. But this was going back for about 20 years. Then in 1845, the worst rains in living memory occurred in the British Isles. The food crops were destroyed in both England and Ireland. People are facing starvation, I mean, in a big way. And under that social pressure, the advocates of free trade persuaded the then Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, who was a Tory, to go along with free trade. And it worked through the House, and then the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and the House of Lords. And in June of 1846, through one act of Parliament, Great Britain established virtual free trade in all of agriculture and most of industry, unilaterally. No mutual agreements, no tit for tats, no if you do this, I'll do that, just unilaterally. They just lowered the trade barriers, even when other countries had some, regardless of what the other countries chose to do. And that was the beginning of England becoming a major industrial power. And in that sense, you're right. What could the Bahamas do unilaterally? Just lower their own trade barriers, regardless of what other countries are doing, and taking advantage of buying low and selling in the best market.
There's a little bit of an irony here, though, because...
Wait, I'm sorry. We are going
Okay, all right.
on towards
Yeah.
A.
Okay.
Would somebody else have their hand up? Several people do. I think we have 5 minutes left, do we not?
Okay.
Yes.
We have 5 minutes left, and I would like to privilege one of our students at UD, if you don't mind. So,
Sure.
go ahead.
Okay, so piggybacking what the guy said earlier about the school systems, I feel like in high school,
Yes.
before we come to college, there's a lot of things that we don't know. Whereas in high school, I feel like there's a lot of things that we find that we don't really use on a day-to-day, as opposed to things that we find in college that we do use on a day-to-day. So I feel like in high school, would you feel that it would be better if we do reform it to include more of like an economics curriculum inside high school or before college?
Well, the question is, it seems that you sometimes learn a lot of things in high school that aren't as useful or relevant as you get older that you do learn in college. And one of them is economics. Well, I'm never going to argue against more economics being taught anywhere, everywhere, at all times. Economics, 24/7. Okay, I know that's not going to fly. But anyway, I think, see, this is a topic in itself. How is education undertaken in any society, including the United States as well as here? And what are people learning, young people learning, when they're in high school or lower than that? And the problem here again is that, and this is obviously a totally separate subject, and that is government managed education. I mean, the government decides the curriculum. The government approves the teaching methods. The government mandates that you go to school and learn it that way from these people in this setting. Well, how do we know that's the best way for education to be taught, or the content? Now, we assume that it's good to have competition for cell phones, for televisions, for the clothes we buy, the shoes we purchase, variety, quality, innovations, improvements. Well, why shouldn't we imagine that with education? I believe that the privatization of education, which is basically allowing parents to choose, students to have their say, and competition to figure out what is it that will give knowledge and information and preparedness to young people, and the incentive to get. Well, you know, there's a wide spectrum of shoe companies, clothes companies, to fit all pocketbooks. And when some people can't afford it, there is philanthropy, charity, immensely. So, and in a growing economy, you need less of that. So the same answer is, who's better to plan your education? Well, to be honest, you and your parents, not the government. Because again, what's motivating the government? To make you good, passive, obedient citizens who won't gripe about anything the government does, but just go along with what they want. That's a very politically motivated statement, but that's how basically I see it. Competition would be good in education, as in these other avenues of life. Okay, that's probably does it then. Thank you very much.
So it's my privilege and honor to thank Professor
Ebeling. Ebeling.
I put an R in there.
No.
Ebeling for gracing us all with his presence, his great lecture, stimulating a lot of interesting questions and discussions that we all hope that you take outside this room with you and integrate into your conversations when inevitably you'll be discussing a session to the WTO with friends, family, colleagues, neighbors. So I would also like to thank the president of the Nassau Institute for working so hard to bring Professor Ebeling down to the University of the Bahamas, whom I'd also like to thank. And as Dr. Ebeling said, this is your third time here? Third, fourth?
Like 9 times.
9 times.
10 times.
I think we love bringing him down. He loves coming down.
You're all great. Thank you
yeah.
for showing up.
And
Even if he's bribed you to be here, thank you anyway.
I bribed him for writing an essay over this lecture. And I do want to point out that one of your privileges of being a member of the UB community is getting to take part in a discussion lecture with a person who writes such great books as For a New Liberalism. You can check it out on hard copy, probably ebook, I imagine.
There's a soft cover for $18. You can get it in a Kindle edition right off Amazon for like $4 or $5.
Yes. So, I believe we also deserve to share thanks with the Templeton Religion Trust, who provides some of the funding opportunities to make things possible, as well as Compass Point, the lodging. Am I forgetting anything?
Well, if I can just, since I feel I owe a special thanks. First of all, Rick Lowe, the director of the Nassau Institute, reminded me in an email today that I've been coming here for like 10 years. It's like 10 or more visits. And I want to thank him sincerely and honestly right here how much I have enjoyed these visits, how much I have learned from having the opportunity to come here so frequently and keep in touch with people here in the society here. I want to thank Professor Forbes. I mean, he has made it possible for the Nassau Institute and myself to be able to speak in front of these students. You've opened the doors of the university to make it possible. I sincerely thank you for that.
All right, I think with that we can conclude the evening. Apologies, we don't have any refreshments for you, but the knowledge is so tasty. Yes.
Food for thought.
Yeah.
Food for thought.